Dear colleagues, many thanks for inviting me to this event. It's really an honor for me to present some European perspective in this very interesting event. Yeah, let me start, of course, with the current COVID-19 crisis that affects all of us. We have seen that on one hand, connectivity holds our economy and society together. We saw that connectivity was very important during the crisis, but also now it will be very important for the exit, so for the recovery and what is coming after that. So we are very keen on looking at opportunities in the future that 5G can bring, that we did already, of course, with you together in the recent years, but this gets now another even more important dimension. So we have, of course, seen some problems also because of the crisis. We have seen some delays in spectrum auctions. We have seen some postponements of investment, of course, some pressure on the sector when there is, of course, less buying power in general and less consumer attitude in the market. So this has, of course, an effect. Compared to other sectors like automotive, this is still manageable, and most of the investment roadmaps, as we understand it, are still going ahead. So we have to go as soon as possible into the recovery mode, despite the new wave that we're now experiencing. And we need some extra effort of everyone, of stakeholders, member states, Commission, to keep on track. Yeah, we are seeing as part of this event, of course, the very interesting developments on the 5G observatory in Spain, what is happening in Spain with the pilots, with the deployments. So this is highly interesting for all of us. We have, as you know, maybe also a 5G observatory at European level, where we're also looking to track what is happening in the EU and globally. There we have seen in our recent report that is published that we are seeing a number of 5G commercial launches. We had in the 5G action plan, that is the strategy of Europe for the 5G deployment. We have targeted end of this year to have every member state, at least one city with 5G commercial service. This is on track in more than half of the member states. We also see very promising, and this we see it in many examples also in this event, very interesting trials and pilots going on in Europe. We have estimated the investment that goes into private-public trials in Europe to be more than 1 billion, which is really a very good position also compared internationally. In commercial deployment, we also have seen, especially in Spain, some other member states like Germany as well, quite ambitious plans of operators to deploy. There are already some deployments that have been done, and also the figures in terms of population coverage that are targeted are very promising. So by end of this year and next year, to go to a significant part of the population that will be able to enjoy the 5G services. And if this is based on the bands, for example, that are available, spectrum bands in Spain, for example, with the mid-band spectrum, this is of course very promising to get really quite high speeds, but also quite good coverage. So this, comparing that to the US, that could be an interesting proposition. We have seen, compared to other regions, a bit less ambitious investments in small cells and new sites. There, I think the Asian countries are more advanced, especially Korea, China. And that, for example, looking at high band spectrum, millimeter wave deployments, there the US is clearly leading. We will be interested, of course, to see how that would mean, what that would mean in terms of consumer experience. What is the fact is that in the iPhone 12, for example, in the phones, the option for millimeter wave capability is only activated in the US and not in Europe. So there we see that we are a bit behind on that. We're leading in the mid-band field, but in the high-band field, Europe has still to catch up, and hopefully this will also happen soon to really get these hotspot speeds with really, again, another 5 to 10 times higher speeds. So what we need to do now to accelerate this deployment, especially in the context of the recovery. You might have seen that we have this recovery plan launched in Europe. These are mainly national investments, where we, of course, working together with the member states to get some consistency and also advice on what is useful. This investment plan is, of course, not 5G only. It's very, very broad, but 5G has been identified as one of the most promising fields. And it has been in general pointed out that we would like to see this plan forward-looking, especially in the area of digital and green. This we call this so-called twin transition, to invest in these two fields that are so critical for Europe's future and competitiveness. Then we also have the EU budget, the overall budget that was also agreed together with the recovery package, which has very important programs that you already know, Horizon Europe, so the research program, where we can also fund well, new technologies like 6G, but also the pilots and trials that we're seeing today, that we can extend and launch new ones. And we have also a new program that might be interesting for you. It's called Connecting Europe Facility. This program is not on research, it's on deployment. And here we have also identified 5G as very important chapters. One is the so-called 5G corridors for connected automated mobility, that we can move ahead in the target towards connecting all highways and major routes with 5G, and by that enable, when ready, automated driving, but in the meantime also have all kinds of other services around vehicles that we can support, including, of course, mobile office in the car and entertainment services and others. So this will be a very important one, and then as part of the Connecting Europe facility, and also what we call 5G communities, another area of that program, where we can also fund 5G deployments with specific use cases. Good, so that is the funding part. So we really have to make sure that these programs are now taking up in a coordinated way, together with the member states funding and the European funding. And that, of course, all this is done to unlock private investment. So we don't have the ambition to pay all these networks with public money. At the end, it's about crowding in private investments. The other angle that we have to look at now is the framework conditions. We have the communications code that now enters into force in all member states, where the regulatory approaches are modernized, like co-investment models and others. Spectrum deadlines are in there. We have to make sure that we meet these deadlines as much as possible, and if there are delays also due to the crisis, to catch up as fast as possible. So Spain is doing very well with the mid-bands. That was an auction that we consider as a good practice. And we still have to boost the other bands that we also ready with the low band and the high band. Spain is not alone, not having assigned all of the bands. We have seen that we only at 25%, if you're taking all the three bands and value them equally, weight them equally, then we have 25% of all member states of the spectrum is assigned only, and this is of course a worrying sign, and we have to make sure that we are advancing. In that context, we have adopted a recommendation last month to work with member states to develop best practices, to get to the conditions that are consistent, that are investment friendly, and indeed follow up on this spectrum agenda. Another interesting area is, of course, 5G cybersecurity. Here you have seen that we have been working very intensively with member states since beginning of last year, and we have come to now this risk assessment and the toolbox of measures, which is the basis, and all member states, of course, took ownership. They all worked on that and agreed to this document. So this is now implementation time. Member states are implementing this toolbox, taking the measures that are specified there. You have a number of strategic measures that are of particular importance. For example, diversity of suppliers, the member states' activities to identify high-risk vendors and apply necessary restrictions and exclusions. There are other important strategic measures, also a bit more mid to long term, thinking about technology sovereignty, for example, where we have to make sure that the funding programs are also rolled out in line with the toolbox, in line with cybersecurity requirements, and of course also making sure that we have the technology capacities in the future in Europe to continue to lead in building these networks, in supplying technology for these networks, as the case today. And here we are looking at beyond 5G, so the next steps in the standardization in the next years, but also already to 6G, which will then be the horizon 2030. So this is very important that all member states are implementing this toolbox. And we, of course, have now to review also the 5G action plan to see the investment agenda. How does it fit with these requirements? We have to do a forward-looking investment agenda, not seeing this investment as a pure cost or the compliance with the toolbox as a pure cost item, but say this is the opportunity now to modernize our 5G networks, make them secure, and really enabling critical services beyond the consumer services that we're starting to see today, but also for vertical industries, for manufacturing, for mobility, health, and other opportunities. What is occupying us all, and what we're following all also in social media and the press, is of course citizens' concerns regarding electromagnetic fields. So we of course take this very seriously, and we have to find ways together at national level and at European level to communicate on this topic. For example, citizens' concerned should know that we have strict limits in place, limits that are 50 times lower than the values where independent organizations are identifying risks. So this is often not known by people that are concerned, so it's a quite easy message. Another one is maybe the possibility for citizens also to check what is the level of the field strength at their home. Some member states are providing this facility that you can look it up on the internet and see what are the recent measurements or what are indications for the value at their where they're interested in. So this is about information and transparency. So we received a letter from many member states now together to coordinate this effort to communicate about it, to inform citizens. We also have to address disinformation, of course. We have seen that over the COVID crisis that 5G was put in relation to the COVID-19 virus and the outbreaks. So this we of course addressed already at European level as well to clarify or to get the facts right in this context. So what next? As I said, recovery and EU level funding programs will be very important. The spectrum to keep the deadlines as much as possible, and also look into new opportunities for other bands for 5G. Cybersecurity implementation is another priority. So these are the priorities. So with keeping this in mind for the short term, we will now start reviewing the 5G action plan. The 5G action plan is the strategy for Europe for 5G that was adopted 2016, already now 4 years ago. So time for review. This was announced in the digital strategy in February that the Commission will do that. So it's formally announced. And this we are now launching. We'll look at the investment agenda for Europe. What are the opportunities in terms of use cases with an horizon 2025 and 2030? And also targets with this time frame. So we have our targets for 2025. We will review those and look at a bit more beyond towards 2030, the date when we would expect that also a new generation 6G could hit the market. Cooperation models are important. So what are the different options for stakeholders to work together? Because it's, especially when you have vertical industries, it's very important to not only see it from a telecom perspective, rolling out networks, then selling services, but it's about also co-investing, or at least already having a common cooperation model, how these services will be taken up. Regulatory barriers we will look again into, like small cells. We mentioned we have the Small Cells Act where we can have easier permits for small cells, but we will look at that more comprehensively. We will look into the spectrum again for coordination, how based on the toolbox, connectivity toolbox, it's not the cyber toolbox, another toolbox that has been adopted last month, where the best practices are exchanged. We will take that up and see what we do with it. Of course, other regulatory issues that like single market approaches that can really boost investments in Europe will be looked into. So this we can expect, this new action plan, we can expect for mid next year. And we, of course, looking forward to work with all stakeholders, with all of you and all member states together to develop this action plan. Another deliverable for this year that you might be following is also the new partnership. We currently have a 5G PPP for research, public-private partnership. This one we will now, with a new budget cycle, make a new partnership as a joint undertaking, so a bit more strategic than the old PPP, where we're really looking at both research and deployment initiatives, and also work very closely with the industry that is in co-lead, but also with the member states. So these are the next steps coming up, and indeed very interesting to follow what is now happening and planned in Spain. And I wish you a very interesting and inspiring event. Thanks a lot for having me.